the final moments before his breath departed, a man whose heart had been shattered into 1,000 fragments performed one last act that would echo through eternity. His hands, trembling with the weight of approaching death, reached not for vengeance, not for justice, but for mercy. The crowd below jeered and spat, their hatred rising like smoke from an unholy altar, yet from lips parched with agony came words that would shake the very foundations of heaven and earth. What power could transform a heart so broken that it bled not only blood but forgiveness itself? This is not merely a story of suffering. This is the account of love's final, impossible victory over every force that sought to destroy it. Consider journeying with us through this sacred narrative, and if these ancient truths speak to the deepest places of your soul, subscribe to continue exploring the mysteries that bridge heaven and earth. The sun rose over Jerusalem on that morning as it had for countless generations, casting golden light across the limestone walls of the holy city. The streets bustled with the usual commerce of Passover week. Pilgrims from distant lands filled the courts of the temple. The air carried the scent of roasting lamb, the sound of psalms, the rhythm of a nation remembering its deliverance from bondage. Yet beneath this familiar tapestry of sacred ritual, something unprecedented was unfolding. In the halls of the high priest, in the fortress of the Roman governor, in the whispered conversations of frightened disciples, a drama was reaching its crescendo that would divide all of human history into before and after. 3 years earlier, the one they called Jesus of Nazareth had walked beside the Sea of Galilee and called ordinary men to an extraordinary purpose. Fishermen abandoned their nets. Tax collectors left their tables. The sick rose from their mats. The blind opened their eyes to a world they had never seen. His words carried an authority that made the learned scribes tremble and the broken-hearted leap with unexpected joy. He spoke of a kingdom not built with hands, a reign established not through the sword but through sacrifice, not through power but through the mysterious alchemy of suffering transformed into redemption. But power fears what it cannot control, and truth threatens those whose authority rests on deception. The religious leaders watched this carpenter's son with growing alarm as crowds followed him, as miracles multiplied, as his teachings exposed the hollow core of their ceremonial righteousness. They had built kingdoms of ritual without relationship, law without love, sacrifice without surrender. And here walked one who claimed not to abolish the law but to fulfill it, not to destroy the prophets but to embody every word they had spoken across centuries of longing and expectation. The betrayal came not from enemies but from the inner circle itself. Judas Iscariot, keeper of the common purse, treasurer of the small band of followers, carried within his chest a heart slowly poisoned by disappointment and greed. He had imagined a different kind of kingdom, one established through political revolution rather than spiritual transformation. When Jesus spoke of drinking cups of suffering and bearing crosses, Judas heard the death of his ambitions. For 30 pieces of silver, the price of a common slave, he agreed to identify his master with a kiss in a garden where olive trees had witnessed prayers too agonizing for words. The night pressed down heavy and dark in Gethsemane. While his closest companions slept, unable to watch with him even 1 hour, Jesus wrestled with a destiny that would require him to drink a cup filled with the accumulated sins, sorrows, and sufferings of all humanity. His sweat fell like drops of blood upon the earth as he prayed words that revealed the deepest mystery of the divine nature. Not my will, but yours be done. Here was the eternal Word made flesh, the one through whom all things were created, as John chapter 1 verses 1 through 3 declares, submitting himself to a Father's purpose even when that purpose led through the valley of death's darkest shadow. The arrest came with torches and swords, with temple guards and Roman soldiers, with the clatter of armor and the confusion of sudden violence. Peter, impulsive and passionate, drew his blade and struck, severing the ear of the high priest's servant. But Jesus, even in the moment of his capture, even as the noose of injustice tightened around him, reached out and healed the wound his defender had inflicted. Touch not the enemy with the sword, for those who live by violence shall perish by violence. Every detail spoke of a kingdom operating by laws that inverted every human assumption about power, victory, and triumph. The trials that followed were mockeries of justice, theatrical performances staged to give legal veneer to predetermined conclusions. Before Annas, before Caiaphas, before the Sanhedrin assembled in violation of their own procedures, Jesus stood accused of blasphemy for claiming equality with God. Yet here was the profound irony that escaped his accusers. As the Gospel of John chapter 10 verse 30 records, when he declared that he and the Father were one, he spoke not arrogance but identity, not presumption but reality. They sought false witnesses, contradictory testimonies, any thread of accusation they could weave into a rope sufficient for execution. When they demanded he answer the charge of being the Christ, the Son of God, he responded with words that sealed his fate. "You have said so. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." The religious court condemned him, but they lacked authority to execute. For this they needed Rome, needed Pontius Pilate, the prefect who ruled Judea with an iron hand gloved in diplomatic pragmatism. Pilate, that curious figure who recognized innocence yet lacked courage to defend it, who washed his hands of responsibility yet signed the execution order, who declared Jesus guiltless 3 times yet surrendered him to crucifixion. The charges shifted now from religious to political. "This man claims to be a king," they insisted. "He threatens Caesar's authority. He stirs up the people." Pilate, caught between his wife's warning dream and the crowd's mounting rage, chose expedience over justice, popularity over principle. The scourging came first, that brutal Roman preliminary to crucifixion designed to weaken the condemned and hasten death upon the cross. Leather straps embedded with bone and metal tore through flesh, opening wounds that would never heal in the few hours remaining. The soldiers, finding entertainment in the suffering of this supposed king, wove a crown from thorn branches and pressed it deep into his scalp. They draped a purple robe across his bleeding shoulders, placed a reed in his hand as a mock scepter, and bowed before him in vicious parody. "Hail, King of the Jews," they laughed, spitting on him, striking him, amusing themselves with the degradation of deity. Isaiah chapter 53 had prophesied centuries earlier that the suffering servant would be despised and rejected, a man of sorrows acquainted with deepest grief. He would be wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, and by his stripes we would find healing. Every lash of the whip, every blow of mockery, every stripe that opened his flesh, was absorbing the punishment that justice demanded for sins he never committed. The innocent bearing the guilt of the guilty. The Holy One becoming sin itself so that sinners might become holy. This was the great exchange, the cosmic transaction that would reconcile a holy God to a fallen humanity. They led him through Jerusalem's streets bearing the heavy wooden beam of his own execution. His strength, depleted by sleeplessness, betrayal, illegal trials, beating and scourging, finally failed. Simon of Cyrene, pulled from the crowd, found himself conscripted to carry the cross of another. Perhaps he resented this intrusion into his day. Perhaps he had no idea that he was participating in the central moment of all history. Behind Jesus walked a crowd of weeping women, mourning the fate of this prophet who had spoken with such authority and compassion. He turned to them with words that looked beyond his own suffering to the judgment that would fall upon the city in a single generation. "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Golgotha, the place of the skull. A small hill outside the city walls where Rome displayed its power through the slow, excruciating public execution of criminals and rebels. Here they crucified him between 2 thieves, fulfilling the prophecy that he would be numbered with transgressors. The cross, that instrument of shame and torture, was designed to maximize suffering while prolonging life. Victims hung for hours or even days, struggling for each breath, as the weight of the body pulled against lungs unable to fully expand. Every movement brought fresh agony. Every breath required pushing up against nails driven through feet, pulling against nails piercing wrists. Above his head they affixed the charge, written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek so all could read. "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." Pilate had written it, and when the chief priests protested, demanding he change the inscription to claim that Jesus only said he was king, the governor refused with rare defiance. "What I have written, I have written." In languages of religion, empire, and philosophy the declaration stood. This was the king, enthroned not on cedar or gold but on rough wood stained with his own blood. The soldiers cast lots for his clothing, gambling at the foot of the cross while life drained away above them. They fulfilled without knowing the ancient words of Psalm 22 verses 16 through 18, which had described this very scene 1,000 years before. "They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." Every detail unfolded according to a script written in eternity, performed in time, accomplishing purposes that angels long to understand. The crowd that gathered showed humanity in all its varied responses to suffering and truth. Some came to mock, wagging their heads, hurling insults at the dying man. You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. The religious leaders, satisfying themselves that their problem was being eliminated, sneered their contempt. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross that we may see and believe. They understood neither the irony of their words nor the depth of their truth. He could have saved himself. The 12 legions of angels Matthew chapter 26 verse 53 speaks of were merely a word away. But salvation of himself would have meant damnation for all others. Even one of the criminals crucified beside him joined the chorus of mockery, demanding that if Jesus were truly the Christ, he should save himself and them as well. But the other thief, with death's clarity stripping away all pretense, recognized something the learned and the religious had missed. "This man has done nothing wrong," he gasped. Then, turning his head with enormous effort, he made a request that revealed faith born in the unlikeliest soil. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Here was a man dying for his crimes, acknowledging justice even as he appealed for mercy. And from lips cracked and bleeding came the promise that would open paradise itself. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." At the foot of the cross stood those whose love proved stronger than fear. Mary, his mother, watching the son she had borne in a Bethlehem stable. The child angel Gabriel had announced, the boy who had grown in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. What sword pierced her heart as Simeon had prophesied in Luke chapter 2 verse 35, watching her firstborn suffer such agony. John, the beloved disciple, the one who had leaned against Jesus' chest at supper, standing firm when others had fled. Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, who had found in Jesus liberation and purpose and love that never condemned. And other women who had followed him from Galilee, ministering to him, supporting his work, faithful to the end. From the cross, through pain that should have consumed all thought, Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved. With words that took enormous effort to force through lungs compressed by crucifixion's torture, he made provision for her care. "Woman, behold your son." Then to John, "Behold your mother." Even in his dying, he thought of others' needs. The second Adam, where the first had brought death through selfish grasping, brought life through selfless giving. Darkness fell at noon. For 3 hours, as Jesus hung between heaven and earth, as he bore the weight of human sin and divine judgment, the sun itself withdrew its light. This was no natural eclipse, for Passover occurred at full moon when eclipses are impossible. This was creation itself recoiling from the sight of its creator being crushed under the burden of cosmic evil. The darkness was not merely physical but spiritual, the shadow of separation when the sun experienced the abandonment that sinners deserve. From the cross came a cry that shook the foundations of theology itself. my God, why have you forsaken me?" These words from Psalm 22 verse 1 revealed the mystery at the heart of the atonement. The Trinity, united in perfect love and communion from eternity, experienced a rupture. The Father turned his face from the Son who had become sin for us, as 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 21 declares. The Holy One could not look upon iniquity. The price of redemption was not just physical death but spiritual separation, the hell that humanity deserved absorbed by deity in an act of love incomprehensible in its magnitude. His throat parched beyond endurance, Jesus said simply, "I thirst." They lifted to his lips a sponge soaked in sour wine, the cheap drink of laborers and soldiers. This fulfilled the prophetic word of Psalm 69 verse 21, that in his thirst they would give him vinegar to drink. Even this small detail had been written into the script of redemption centuries before its enactment. Then, summoning strength that could only have been sustained by divine purpose, Jesus made a declaration that echoed through heaven and hell, through time and eternity. It is finished. Tetelestai in the Greek, a word that carried profound meaning. Not it is ended in defeat, but it is completed in victory. Not I am finished, but the work is finished. The debt is paid. The sacrifice is accepted. The way is opened. The curse is broken. Sin's penalty is satisfied. Death's power is shattered. The ancient serpent's head is crushed. The captives are freed. The prison doors are opened. The veil is torn. Tetelestai. It is finished. With his final breath, Jesus spoke words that revealed trust transcending all suffering. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Not his life taken by force, but surrendered by choice. As John chapter 10 verse 18 records his own words, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." The moment of his death released consequences that rippled through the physical and spiritual realms. The massive veil in the temple, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, tore from top to bottom. This was no human hand pulling at fabric, but divine fingers ripping aside the barrier that had stood between God and humanity since Eden's gate closed. The way into the Father's presence, formerly restricted to the high priest once a year, now stood open to all who would enter through faith in the sacrifice completed at Calvary. As Hebrews chapter 10 verses 19 through 20 declares, we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. The earth shook. Rocks split. Tombs opened. The centurion who had supervised countless executions, who had witnessed every manner of death, who knew courage and cowardice, defiance and despair, stood at the foot of the cross and made a confession that reversed his allegiance. Truly this was the Son of God. A Roman soldier, a Gentile, an agent of the empire that had executed this Jewish teacher, became one of the first to acknowledge what the religious leaders rejected. The kingdom was opening to unexpected citizens. Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple who had feared to publicly align himself with Jesus during his life, found courage in death to approach Pilate and request the body. Nicodemus, who had come to Jesus by night to discuss spiritual birth, brought 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes for burial preparation. Together they wrapped the body according to Jewish custom, laying it in a new tomb hewn from rock, a grave that had never held another corpse. They rolled a massive stone across the entrance. The Sabbath was approaching, and even in death, the rhythms of the covenant marked time. The religious leaders, nervous that the movement might continue, requested that Pilate station guards and seal the tomb. They remembered Jesus' predictions of rising on the third day and feared the disciples might steal the body and claim resurrection. So Rome's authority and Israel's priesthood collaborated to secure a grave, not realizing they were merely setting the stage for the greatest demonstration of divine power in human history. For a day and a night and another day, the tomb held its treasure. The disciples scattered, hiding in fear that they would be arrested next. The women who had watched from Golgotha planned to return after Sabbath with additional spices for the body. Hope seemed as dead as their master. Every promise he had made appeared to have died with him on that cross. The kingdom they had anticipated looked like nothing more than a beautiful dream shattered by brutal reality. But early on the first day of the week, as dawn was breaking, as the darkness of Saturday gave way to Sunday's light, something happened that would transform everything. The women came to the tomb expecting to find death and discovered instead an empty grave, an angel announcing resurrection, and instructions to tell the disciples that Jesus was going ahead of them into Galilee. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. The broken heart had performed its final miracle. Not on the cross, where forgiveness flowed like blood toward those who murdered him. Not in the garden, where he healed the enemy's servant even as he was being arrested. Not in the tomb, where death could not hold the author of life. The ultimate miracle was this, that brokenness itself became the instrument of healing, that weakness manifested power, that death birthed life, that loss produced gain, that suffering achieved glory, that sacrifice secured victory. As 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 24 declares, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. The broken heart of God, expressed through the broken body of the Son, opened a way for every broken human heart to find healing, forgiveness, purpose, and eternal hope. This is not merely history. This is invitation. The same Jesus who died on that Roman cross, who was laid in that borrowed tomb, who rose on that first Easter morning, who appeared to disciples and hundreds of witnesses, who ascended into heaven and sits now at the Father's right hand, offers to every person the gift purchased with his blood. forgiveness for every sin, cleansing for every stain, reconciliation despite every rebellion, life in the place of death, hope instead of despair, purpose to replace meaninglessness. The last miracle of that broken heart continues today, echoing across centuries, reaching into every corner of the world, touching every life that will receive its offer. It is the miracle of transformation, of new birth, of old things passing away and all things becoming new. It is the miracle of the cross, where divine justice and divine mercy met, where holiness and love embraced, where wrath and grace were satisfied in a single act of infinite sacrifice. If this account of the greatest love ever demonstrated has stirred something deep within your soul, if you sense the Spirit drawing you toward the one who loved you enough to die for you, do not resist. Share this truth with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to continue this journey through the profound mysteries of faith that transform broken hearts into vessels of divine grace. For the miracle performed on Golgotha 2,000 years ago remains powerfully effective today, offering healing to every broken heart that will come to the foot of the cross and look up at the Savior who loved us enough to die, and who loved us enough to rise again, conquering death itself so that we might live forever in His presence.